Hello, my friends, and welcome back. Thank you very much for being with me again today. For some of us who have been paying attention in a balanced way to the mass media, which is picking information from as many sources as we could and try to verify how much we could the veridicity of the sources and news, the articles. These two articles that deal with the same issue that I will use in this video would not come as a surprise. So what happened? Do you remember when those evil Russians kept saying that in March 2022 the Ukrainians and the Russians agreed to a peace plan in Istanbul, in March 2022, if you remember. After the two delegations met about 5 times since February 24th to February 24th, 2022 to mid-March 2022. And then when they discussed the framework of the peace, the Ukrainian delegation, agreed to the terms and then returned to Kiev. And upon returning to Kiev, then Prime Minister of Great Britain landed in Kiev, and in a few days the whole deal collapsed and the Ukrainians did not want to communicate with the Russians again. Well, that story was told from time to time by the Russians and others. And now we have a testimony coming from the Ukrainians themselves, confirming that to happen. And not only that they were turned around and convinced by Boris Johnson to continue the war, which would make him kind of responsible, but I think the Ukrainians were also adults, so they had the power to say yes or no, and they said yes, we're going to continue. But also the goodwill move done by the Russians in Kiev. Remember when they said that when the Russians came to Kiev and then they pulled back because I don't know why. The Russians kept saying that they pulled back from Kiev as a sign of goodwill and because of the negotiations, and the Ukrainians supposedly shafted them. That means, again, trust them. It was, according to the Ukrainians, a matter of distrust between the Russians and Ukrainian delegation. So let's read these two articles. One comes from Ukrainska Pravda and the other one comes from Russia Today. Dealing with the same issue, the same individual claiming that, and he is, I think, the head of Ukraine's leading party, the party that Zelensky belongs to. So he's saying that. Interesting name, Mr. Head of the party. So here is the Ukrainian article, or coming from the Ukrainians, Ukrainska Pravda, Friday, November 24th, 2023. Head of Ukraine's leading party claims Russia proposed quote-unquote peace in exchange for neutrality and exchange of no NATO membership. So this is the head, who looks like Zelensky. That's why it looks very interesting. I looked for him, but he's a Russian-born something, but he looks Russian as I look sub-Saharan African. Anyway, David, very interesting name, Arakamia, leader of the Servant of the People faction, who led the Ukrainian delegation at peace talks with the Russians in Belarus and Turkey in 2022, said that the Russian delegation promised Kiev peace in exchange for refusing to join NATO, but the Ukrainians did not believe them. Supposedly. I think maybe these guys are trying to portray this as a misunderstanding. We wanted to have peace all along, but it was a misunderstanding. Let's start over. So Details. Journalist Moseichuk, oh my God, from Moses, we got it, noted that at a meeting with an African delegation, Vladimir Putin showed a supposedly ready-made draft peace agreement with Ukraine agreed during the negotiations in Belarus, which was allegedly initiated in Istanbul, Turkey. Yes, he did. According to Putin, there were 18 articles in the so-called agreement on the permanent neutrality of Ukraine and security guarantees, where, and I'm quoting, everything is spelled out, from military equipment to personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine, end quote. And allegedly the document was signed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. I covered that in one of my videos. Arakamia stressed, for some reason, and I'm quoting, Putin did not publish this document. Why do you think? If he has such a document, he would have made it public. Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to answer for Putin, but my observation. The Russians are more diplomatic than the Americans, the Brits, the Germans, the French, and these guys. Many times, Foreign Minister Lavrov, Sergei Lavrov, bashed the West, saying that they do diplomacy in front of the cameras or something like this, or a kind of like a media diplomacy, and that's not how it works. Too many people leak all kind of information, and it's not up to these guys to decide. Certain things must be done according to Sergei Lavrov, and I'm pretty sure there isn't diplomacy behind closed doors. And then a joint conference and communique results out of that. And then the media can take that. The media doesn't have to have everything. So maybe Putin did not want to destroy this kind of possible understanding later. This is my observation. This is my interpretation. If you want to be very rudimentary, not you, but these guys, then of course they will think of Putin as being like rudimentary, like a caveman. I don't think that was the case. And I'm quoting, they really hoped almost to the last moment that they would force us to sign such an agreement, so that would take neutrality. It was the most important thing for them. They said that many times. That's why they spoke with NATO and Ukraine, and they attacked unprovoked Ukraine and NATO. They were prepared, I mean, NATO intervened, waiting for the Russians. They were prepared to end the war if we agreed to, as Finland once said, neutrality, and committed that would not join NATO, end quote. In fact, this was the key point. Everything else was simply rhetoric and political seasoning about denazification, the Russian-speaking population, and blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm not sure about the Russian-speaking population because the Kiev regime was killing them in Donbass since 2014, since the coup. When asked why Ukraine did not agree to this point, Arakamia replied that there was no confidence in the Russians because they were ready to promise anything. Well, they were the only ones that were consistent, saying what they want and saying what they're gonna do and saying what their goals were the Russians. The other ones were wishy-washy. And I'm quoting, first, in order to agree to this point, it is necessary to change the constitution. Our path to NATO is written in the constitution. Well, that is your mistake, right? And when did you put that? After 2014? How did you put that? Who put that? The elected officials without the Ukrainian approval? Ukrainian people? Why? Because the guys in Donbass did not vote, did they? And the guys in charge came over there after a bloody coup. And the next regimes, or the next, how should I put it? The guys in charge that were voted, right? Administrations, let's put it nicely, administrations, or if you want to be clear, they were illegitimate. Because let me give you an analogy. You have a king, and the king has two sons, one a bastard and then a legitimate son. Now we know that the bastard, the illegitimate son, cannot be the king because of certain laws, right? And let's say the king dies, and then you got the legitimate son getting in the office as a king, and then the illegitimate son goes and kills the legitimate son, and he becomes the king. Now he's illegitimate, and nobody will topple this new illegitimate king, that he has the power by force. And then this illegitimate king is going to have his children, and his children are going to have his children. This is the administrations. So starting from something illegitimate, you can't continue with something legitimate. So all the new generations of the illegitimate king will be illegitimate in the next generations because the beginning was illegitimate. So the fact that it was a so-called revolution, a coup in 2014, organized and helped by other people from outside, with the help of some from inside, now that's treason. And then Viktor Yanukovych, the legitimate government, democratically elected, was toppled. Then these guys came over there. They were the illegitimate guys. The guys in Donbass said, we don't recognize you, get out. And said, no, we're going to send you something to you. Send the army, and that's how we started. And then these guys in Kiev, they organized elections without the Donbass, starting from illegitimacy. Even if people voted, it was not the entire Ukraine who voted for the legitimate government in Kiev. Therefore, Zelensky is illegitimate. He doesn't represent the Ukrainians, part of the Ukraine. And he came because all that was started by 2014. So I don't know why this guy is talking about the Constitution. When was that put in the Constitution? So let's go back here. Secondly, there was no confidence in the Russians that they would do it. That's true, but there was no confidence in you that you would do it, and you proved you wouldn't do it. So you were the weasels here. This could only be done if there were security guarantees. We could not sign something, step away, everyone would relax there, and then they would invade even more prepared because they have in fact gone in unprepared for such a resistance. Partly true. Therefore, we could only explore this route when there is absolute certainty that this will not happen again. So they're okay, or they would have been. There is no such certainty. And he says, moreover, when we returned from Istanbul, Boris Johnson came to Kiev and said that we would not sign anything with them at all, and let's just fight. Did you hear that? So NATO probably sent this imbecile. At the same time, Arakamia denied that Ukrainian delegation was ready to sign such a document and that Johnson forced Kiev's hand. According to Arakamia, the delegation did not even have the legal right to sign anything. That's true. They did it, it was not finite. That could only theoretically happen at a meeting of Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. True. And it says here, they actually advise us not to go in ephemeral security guarantees with the Russians, which could not have been given at a time at all, said Akamia, who did the negotiation delegation. That's true. That's true. It says, in his opinion, the delegation achieved the priority tasks by 8 points out of 10 because the Russians still left, quote unquote, retreated from Kiev, left, and then everything turned into a purely military direction. So that's their version. This is Russia Today. Boris Johnson derailed Ukraine peace deal, key Zelensky ally. So what I'm going to look here, I'm going to give you the interpretation. When we returned from Istanbul, Boris Johnson came to Kiev and said that we would not sign anything with the Russians at all, and said, let's just continue fighting. You continue fighting. And he says here, let me show you their interpretation of Kiev. Kiev threw out the preliminary deal as soon as Russia withdrew its troops from the vicinity of Kiev as a gesture of goodwill. The pullback was portrayed by Kiev and its Western backers as a major Ukrainian military victory, which greatly reinforced the position of those willing to pour military aid into the country. So Earlier this year, Russian President presented a draft agreement on permanent neutrality and so on. So yes, it's true. Boris Johnson is responsible for the destruction from mid February, March 2022. He's the one. But you can't just blame him because, people can come in and just say, I suggest you do this. I don't think, unless Boris Johnson had really authority over the government in Kiev. Therefore, again, the guys in Kiev's fault. The guy from London can come and say, no, we keep fighting. And the guys in Kiev could have said, no, screw you. Go back to your Thames and your garbage over there, and we're going to deal with the Russians. But they didn't. So, it's both. But if Boris Johnson would have said, yeah, I think it's a good idea, maybe this could have been arranged and stopped by, let's say, April. So yes, again, the Russians, I think, told the truth regarding this garbage coming over there and derailing the... what are we going to do? You're going to do what we tell you to do. Go and work for us. Pop, 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 pop. Stay strong, stay smart, look for the truth, and be just.